Hello and welcome to Rick's RC Flying Channel. This is episode 3 of the Sweet and Low build. In this episode, we're going to be putting the tail together, and we're going to take a close look at the alignment procedure to make sure that the fuselage is perfectly square at all angles and the taper to the tail is exactly according to plan. Once that's done, we're going to install the rest of the components to the fuselage. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the episode, we're pretty much going to have this fuselage completed. So let's get started. So in order to put the tail together, we have to make sure that the fuselage is perfectly lined up. Now I had to turn my plans around in order to put the top view of the airplane closer to me. So the first thing you need to do is place the airplane on top of the top view, take a square, bring it to the firewall area, line up the bottom of the square with the firewall, and then make sure that the fuselage makes contact with the square. Then what you do is you check the sides of the fuselage that in fact that they are sitting with the side view of the plans. Now, when you're leaning over the table, different angles, you could have an improper sighting of the lineup. So what I do is I take a square, line up the bottom of the square with the line on the plans, and then do a check to make sure that the top, in fact, now is lined up with the outer edge on the plans. And you go around and you do that all around the airplane. Now you temporarily clamp the tail. And another thing you want to make sure as you're lining up this box area, I went and put some T-pins in various areas just to make sure that this area here cannot move. And then because we have it temporarily clamped, we can start to do a sighting to see how the taper is lining up with the plans. Now again, take your square, you line the square up with the bottom of the plans and then do a sighting up just to make sure that in fact it is properly lined up. Now by using the square, you'll also detect in case that sidewall is off slightly. It may be lined up on the bottom, but it could be off at the top. And that's in fact why I had to put two clamps here, just to kind of make sure the top was exactly in the vertical position. So we know these sides are in fact lined up properly with the plans. And again, you can do the cross-checking by using the square. Another check is the fact that on the plans, right down the center of the fuselage, they have a line that goes all the way through. Take a measurement of the center point on these bulkheads. So here's firewall, F2, there's a center mark, F3, there's a center mark, and F4. Again, I wouldn't trust just by, looking up overhead. Take the center of the square, put it on that center line on the plans, and then check. And you can see that my center mark is lined up with the square. These are all confirmation checks that everything is starting to line up properly. And then what you do is you check down here and see how the center post looks in relation to that center line. All right, these are very important checks. Another thing I do is I use dividers and I do what I call a witness check. I'll go down, for example, at the bottom here, and I will take a measurement, bring it up, and there it is, bang on. I'll go down here, I'll do another check, bring it on the top, bang on. So I'll go all throughout the airplane and do these witness checks just to make sure, because sometimes, you could be doing all kinds of measurements and checking with the square. And then when you start doing some witness checks, all of a sudden you come across something, go, wait a sec, why aren't these measurements the same? So that's a handy thing to do. The other thing I had to install was another bulkhead here in the back called F5. So it's one thing just to slide that down, but in order to make sure that it's not misaligned, take a square, get it in there, and make sure that it's, properly vertical before you glue it in. Um, I have all kinds of squares. I know this looks ridiculously small, but sometimes you just got to get into a really tight area like here, and you can squeeze it in there just to make sure things are the way they're supposed to be. Now, this is basically a very simple box style fuselage, straight sides. So doing all these checks with squares works really well. It's simple. Uh, Everybody has some squares, and but if I'm doing a complicated project, with a fuselage is round and that, more advanced type models, I do have a laser system, and I use lasers to line different components of the airplane. But for the most part, generally speaking, just a bunch of squares, have some rulers handy, and you know, you can do a really good job making sure everything is accurately true. So once you are happy, you can release some of the tension back here, spread this open, and get some 30-minute epoxy in there. And we're going to let that cure overnight before we go on to the next steps. So I'm just doing the wing mount blocks. And if you have a piece that's, not split like this, you could use a 1-inch thick hardwood block. I just happen to have two 1/2-inch ones. Don't have any 1-inch blocks, so I'm just going to sandwich them together with epoxy. One thing is that when you use piano wire and you have the glue on, you can easily get the glue off just by rotating the piano wire, and then it's basically almost clean. The other thing is, depending on the temperature of your epoxy, your workshop environment, that sometimes when you pick up glue, it'll drip off like that. One nice thing with the piano wire is you pick up the glue, you just slowly keep rotating it, and it never drips off, and then you can precisely apply the glue. The other thing with piano wire, when you have to apply it on a flat surface, you just roll some on there, and it's very easy to spread it out in a consistent fashion and blobbing it all on. The glue that comes sticking out the sides of any joint really doesn't have that much value. Uh, I see often where there's just far too much glue applied in model building. And of course, you're always going to get some of it coming out the sides, which is, fine. Ultimately, you can sand that away. These are hardwood blocks, so, sanding the epoxy off is really not going to be an issue. So you can see you have really good control with piano wire. You can evenly flatten the glue out. And, anytime you want to get rid of the glue, just rotate it on the card, and then you can go back and remove any glue you want, or makes for a nice even joint. What was now required is to make sure that all the edges are perfectly smooth and square. So you basically take a sanding block and make sure you take one that goes right across both sides. I would avoid using a short one and working on one side, because there's a very good chance you're going to start to make things uneven. So take your sanding block and do both sides, and your finger is one of the best indicators that everything matches and is perfectly smooth. You want to make sure that none of the bulkheads are protruding higher, because it's going to affect the sheeting. And particularly this whole firewall area, take your finger and make sure everything is nice and smooth, because we want a really good flat surface. The other thing you can do, always a good indicator, is to take a good quality a steel edge and then check to see that everything is properly level. If you see light through there, you're going to have to make some sanding adjustments. Another thing I do, I do some checks. For example, I'll measure from the firewall. You can pick any number you want. I just happen to pick 140 millimeters, and then I do a check, and I see that at this point it is 150. Take the other side, go 140, and then we'll do another check, and it is exactly 150. So that's a good sign. If it's off, you'll have to investigate. And I do the check at various places. So here from this bulkhead, we'll do a 140. I just use 140. So we got, I'm just squaring it up back here. So we got 135. So I got 140 and 135. And I've done the check throughout the side. Now here, this area here, you have to sand it. It's going to take you a little while because this here is Norwegian plywood, and it's two pieces. Well, actually, one is 5-ply, and this is, pardon me, this is 4-ply. These are 5-ply with another, looks like 3-ply. So because the different hardness of these plywoods, these doublers are softer plywood. So when you're sanding, and again, use one that goes straight across, what we wanted to do, this was, not at an angle because it was originally installed. And we have to make sure that we get this all at the same angle. Again, use one that goes straight across. Be careful as you're sanding, because these are harder, there's going to be a tendency to get this into a low spot. So it's very important to take that steel rule and keep checking that it's exactly the same angle. So it's going to take a bit of effort. You may have to, no doubt, focus in this area here to get this down at the right angle. The same thing with the firewall. And be careful how you hold the block. Don't hold it like this because you'll never get it even because of the way the pressure from the hand. And so try to get your hand in the center of the block and try to do even pressure. I'll tell you another thing that I do just to make sure I don't get one side lower than the other is that I turn it around. And right now I got my dust collector in the way, but I turn it around and then I do it again. Just by where you're standing and the pressure of your arm can cause unevenness. So at a certain point, I turn it around and I do it again. Another thing I do is go around and check that everything has stayed perfectly square, which it has. And I check all throughout that I haven't put something misaligned. So once you're happy with all that, now we got a nice fuselage. It's all square. Everything is even. So now we can start to progress. I made two. These are hardwood wing mount blocks. I happen to sandwich two of them together with epoxy. So they're going to be installed. They're also going to be reinforced with triangular stock. And another little thing, I mean, this is balsa wood. I mean, this bottom part is hardwood. So when you put it on your workbench, that's not a problem. But the tail is balsa wood. So always have some handy foam blocks so you can support the airplane on it. And that way, when you're putting pressure, such as when you're sanding, that you're not marking up the balsa wood. I mean, invariably, you're going to get little dents and nicks, but the less of them you have, the better when it comes to finishing the airplane. The other thing we're going to have to work on, and that's one of the reasons we had to have this at the angle, this is the landing gear mount. So it See, that's why we want this angle so it nicely fits and really bonds well to this area. This is also where the wing dowel is going to go in. And you know, it's interesting when you first look at this and you see, boy, that's not very much plywood in that area. And you know, you think about pulling high G's and that, but you're putting, in this case, this is 5-ply Norwegian plywood. It's aircraft grade. That's going right on top there. This is so strong, you never have to worry. So that's where the landing gear will be mounted, and the rest here will be 1/4-inch sheeting. So we're going to work on that. And I mount my landing gear differently than what the plans, but we'll get more into that when I get to that stage. Okay, so that's where we're at right now. So I'm going to glue these in and glue this. And this, of course, I'm going to use 30-minute epoxy. So it's going to take a while for it to cure. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of stress there. All right, we're coming to the end of episode 3. And we've pretty much completed a considerable amount on the fuselage. So let's just do a recap what has been done and what needs to still be done. So starting off at the front, we can see, of course, that you know we have the 3/4-inch triangular stock here, which reinforces the firewall. The fuel tank compartment has all the necessary side braces and cross braces, and then we have a 1/8-inch balsa floor, which simply fits in. We have an opening here in the front and access here in the back should you want to run any other wires there or smoke oil lines or whatever. So it gives you easy access. Also, we have triangular stock 3/4-inch reinforcing the landing gear mounting plate. Now, the Sweet and Low instructions don't call for this additional strengthening of the bulkheads, but I have added 3/8-inch triangular stock front and back, and then added cross bracing and did the exact same for the rear bulkhead. And by doing that, it adds considerable strength to this whole area. Then, of course, we have the remaining cross braces that go down the fuselage. And we also have installed another bulkhead here in the back known as F5. So that, in essence, completes the top components of the fuselage. Then, of course, you made sure that you sanded everything flush. And, you know, last little check that everything is really nice and square. So we're happy with that. And then we apply the sheeting on top of the fuselage. Now, the sheeting is rather substantial. It's 3/16-inch balsa wood, not that commonly used. However, in this airplane design, the top is sheeted with this 3/16-inch. So that's what I'm going to be doing next, is sheeting the entire top of the fuselage. And in essence, once that's done, aside from any final sanding, you know, the sides and the top of the fuselage we're done. And, you know, of course, down the road, we'll talk about, you know, cockpit installation if you know, want to cut it out and put a cockpit in and that. But in essence, though, constructing the fuselage, once this top is on, we're done. Let's take a look on the bottom part of the fuselage. Now, the instructions of the Sweet and Low call for 1/4-inch balsa wood sheeting and closing this up. Now, under the fuel tank floor, this area here is quite a decent compartment size. So I've done it to the other Sweet and Lows, and that is I'm going to put an access panel here, and then I'll just sheet this portion up front. And I'm running a glow engine, so I'm going to put a glow driver in this compartment and some batteries. It'd be a shame to close that up because there's some really decent space here. You know, if you're running a gas engine, you may want to consider putting your ignition system in there and batteries. So that's another change that wasn't called for in the plans. And of course, we have our wing mounting blocks here, and the dowel mount has all been drilled out there, so we're good to go that way. And of course, the bottom of this bulkhead received the same cross braces. Again, like I said, that's just something we added. And then we have cross braces throughout here. So although I'm sheeting the top of the fuselage, I will not be sheeting the bottom just yet. In episode 4, I'm going to be building the entire tail. And so I've already put the plans out here to build the horizontal stab and the elevator. Just further up ahead here, slightly will be out of view, but the plans show the vertical stab and the rudder. So I'll be building the entire tail, and when that's done, we're going to glue on the tail, and because we left the bottom open, I'm going to have very easy access to install the push rods, get everything hooked up to the controls and the rudder cables. And while that installation is taking place, and depending on how the routing is, I'm going to install the servo tray, and I'll be able to position it at exactly where I want, so everything lines up. And boy, there sure is a lot of room in here, you know, to get your hands in or anything you may want to put in there. Now, that being said, you know, we always try to strive that any equipment you put in there, whenever it lends itself, I always try to get that equipment forward of the CG, which is, again, a reason I want to utilize this compartment. In terms of space, I mean, once the fuel tank is in here, it's a fair-sized fuel tank. It's a 24-ounce tank. And, you know, the back of the tank will be here. You really don't have much access to put much in there. And, of course, this is closed up, which, again, is what, you know, makes me want to use this compartment down here. Now, I'll just show you what the landing gear looks like. And it's a very substantial aluminum gear, very simple to install. Of course, it's just going to be attached here. Now, you may notice I have some holes here. I actually have a torsion system that gets attached there. We'll get much more into that when we install the landing gear. Now, what I want to point out, though, is look how wide this is. The wheels are going to be out here. It's a very wide stance. And the wide gear really helps with the tracking of the airplane. And not only does the wide gear allow for easier tracking, but the fuselage from here to here is a long moment arm. It's a long fuselage. And because of that, the airplane tracks amazingly straight down the runway with very little effort. And so it's a really nice handling characteristic. You know, if you look at airplanes like a Pitts Special or a GB or an ME-109, you know, airplanes with narrow landing gear and short couple fuselages are far more demanding to keep straight down the runway. And because of this particular design and handling characteristic with the wide landing gear, this firewall has 0 degrees offset, and the engine gets mounted 0 degrees. You know, typically, especially short coupled airplanes, the engines are offset to, you know, offset the torque effect and P factors that you get from the engine. So just thought, you know, I'd mention that because not only is it an easy airplane to fly in the air, but it also has some really nice ground handling characteristics. So that's where we're left off. There's really not much more to do to the fuselage. You can see that, you know, basically in the 3 episodes, we've almost finished this part. Episode 4, as I said, is going to be the building and installation of the tail. And after that, we're going to build the wings. And the wings are constant chord. They're pretty straightforward, and they're not going to take that long to build. And so if you like the video, Please hit like and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, I welcome them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.